20 of the world's best doctors crowded into a billionaire's bedroom, watching his mother die right in front of them. Machines were screaming, treatments were failing, and in that silent moment when everyone realized they were out of options, the maid stepped forward. A woman whose name they didn't even know, holding a steaming bowl from their own kitchen, and whispered, "Let me try." She had no medical degree, no license, no right to even speak in that room. She was just the invisible woman who cleaned their floors and changed their sheets. So how did a poor maid end up doing what 20 specialists could not? By the end of the story, you'll know exactly what she did, and why every doctor in that room will never forget her name. But to understand how she got there, we have to rewind, back to the night when a cleaning shift, a strange smell, and one impossible decision changed everything. If stories about ordinary people doing the impossible hit you the way they hit me, make sure you're following this channel, because what happened after this night is just as unbelievable as what happened during it. The Hale estate sat on 40 acres of manicured lawns and old-growth trees, hidden behind iron gates that most people in the city had never seen opened. From the outside, it looked like a palace. From the inside, it was two different worlds sharing the same roof. The main house rose 4 stories into the sky, all marble columns and crystal chandeliers. Every room was bigger than most people's entire homes. The East Wing had been converted into a private medical facility that would make most hospitals jealous. Custom equipment, private nurses, everything money could buy to keep one woman alive. Behind the main house, connected by a covered walkway, sat the staff quarters. 12 small rooms where the people who kept the estate running tried to sleep between shifts. The maids, the cooks, the groundskeepers, the security team. They lived in a different universe, one that smelled like industrial soap and leftover food, where the lights flickered and the heat never quite worked right. In one of those small rooms lived Lila Ortiz, 24 years old, undocumented, and as invisible as the dust she swept from the marble floors. She'd been working at the estate for 8 months, long enough to know which floorboards creaked, which doors the family never opened, and exactly how long she had to clean each room before someone noticed she was there. By day, she polished silver that cost more than her family's house back home. She changed sheets that were softer than anything she'd ever slept on. She dusted picture frames, holding photos of people who looked right through her. By night, in her cramped room under a bare bulb, she studied a leather notebook filled with her grandmother's careful handwriting. Most nights, those pages were just memories of home, recipes for teas and remedies that seemed like fairy tales in this world of marble and machines. Tonight, they would be the only thing standing between a dying woman and the end. The woman dying in the East Wing was Miriam Hale, and she had once been exactly what Lila was now. 60 years ago, Miriam had cleaned houses and scrubbed floors to keep her son fed. She'd worked 3 jobs, slept 4 hours a night, and never complained. When her son Victor made his first million, he bought her a small house. When he made his first billion, he built her a palace. Victor Hale owned half the tech companies in Silicon Valley. His medical AI systems promised to predict disease before symptoms appeared. His algorithms could spot cancer in blood tests, heart attacks in heartbeats, strokes in speech patterns. He'd built an empire on the idea that data and science could solve anything, but all his money and all his machines couldn't solve what was happening to his mother. It had started 6 months ago with a cough that wouldn't go away. Then came the swollen ankles, the shortness of breath, the episodes where she'd gasp for air like she was drowning. Victor had flown in specialists from Switzerland, cardiologists from Japan, pulmonologists from Johns Hopkins. He'd installed equipment that most hospitals couldn't afford. He'd tried every drug, every treatment, every experimental therapy money could buy. The diagnosis kept changing. Heart failure, pulmonary fibrosis, autoimmune disease, rare infection. Each new doctor brought a new theory and a new set of pills. Miriam's bedside table looked like a pharmacy. Her medical chart was thicker than a phone book. But she kept getting worse. Every few weeks, another specialist would arrive with another explanation. They'd run more tests, adjust more medications, install more machines. The only thing that never changed was the air she was breathing. And that, in the end, was the problem. The night everything came apart, the city was being hammered by the worst storm in years. Wind howled through the trees around the estate. Rain lashed against the windows like thrown stones. The power had flickered twice, sending the backup generators humming to life. Lila was in the main house, working her way through the second-floor hallway with a dustcloth and a bottle of polish. The family was gathered in the East Wing around Miriam's bed. She could hear voices, urgent and worried, drifting through the walls. She was polishing a marble table when the first alarm sounded, a sharp electronic beeping that cut through the storm noise like a knife. Then came the voices, louder now, calling for medications and equipment, then running footsteps on the marble floors. Lila froze, cloth in her hand, listening to the chaos building in the medical wing. And that's when she smelled it. Sweet. Floral. But wrong somehow. Like expensive perfume mixed with something chemical and sharp. It hung in the air throughout the house, so familiar she'd stopped noticing it months ago. Tonight, with her heart pounding and her grandmother's voice echoing in her memory, she noticed it again. 3 years ago, in her village in the Philippines, a neighbor's child had almost died after his aunt brought home a fancy aroma diffuser from Manila. The boy had been playing in the room when his throat started to close. His breathing turned to wheezing, then to desperate gasps. By the time they carried him to Lila's grandmother, his lips were blue. Lola Maritz had taken one look at the child, one sniff of the air in that room, and smashed the diffuser against the wall. She dragged the boy outside, forced him to breathe steam from a pot of boiled guava leaves, and saved his life. "The air is poison," she'd said. "Fix the air first, then help the body remember how to breathe." Now, in this mansion full of marble and machines, that same wrong sweetness filled every room. And in the medical wing, another person was fighting for breath. Lila set down her cloth and stood in the hallway, heart hammering against her ribs. She could go back to the staff quarters, finish her shift, pretend she hadn't heard anything. Or she could walk toward the one part of the house where she was absolutely forbidden to go. The choice she made in the next 10 seconds would save her and destroy her in ways she couldn't imagine. She could hear her grandmother's voice as clearly as if the old woman was standing beside her in that marble hallway. "If you can help, you help, Anak. Even if they don't want to listen, even if they throw you out. A body in trouble is heavier than your fear." Lila dropped the polish and cloth on the table and walked toward the medical wing. The east wing of the Hale mansion had been transformed into something that belonged in a science fiction movie. The hallway gleamed with white tile and soft lighting. Medical equipment hummed behind closed doors. The air smelled like antiseptic, and that wrong floral scent, stronger here than anywhere else. As she got closer to Miriam's suite, she could hear the chaos more clearly. Voices calling out numbers, the sharp beeping of monitors, someone shouting orders about medications and oxygen levels. Through the partially open door, she caught glimpses of white coats moving frantically around the massive bed where Miriam lay. Lila had cleaned that room dozens of times. She knew every piece of furniture, every machine, every decoration, including the sleek white diffuser that sat on the dresser, quietly pumping its expensive mist into the air 24 hours a day. She was 3 steps from the doorway when a hand grabbed her shoulder. "What are you doing here?" The voice belonged to Marcus Webb, the head of estate security. He was a mountain of a man who'd made it clear from her first day that the help should stay in their designated areas. His grip on her shoulder felt like a vice. "I work here," Lila stammered, her accent thicker when she was nervous. "I heard the alarms. I think something is wrong with the air." Marcus looked at her like she'd spoken in a foreign language. "You're housekeeping. This is a medical emergency. Go back to your quarters." "But the smell," she insisted, pointing toward Miriam's room. "That machine, the one that makes the sweet smell. I think it's making her sick." Marcus actually laughed. "The aromatherapy diffuser? That's medical-grade equipment, prescribed by her doctors. You don't know what you're talking about." Every instinct told her to back down, apologize, disappear back to the staff quarters where she belonged. But through the open door, she could see Miriam on the bed, her small body rigid, her face the wrong color. The monitors were screaming. The doctors were running out of options. "Please," Lila said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Just turn it off. Just for a few minutes. If I'm wrong, nothing changes. If I'm right, you're a maid," Marcus said flatly. "They're doctors. Go back to your room before I have to escort you." That's when Victor Hale appeared in the doorway. Lila had seen him hundreds of times over the past 8 months, but always from a distance. He was the kind of man who looked through the help like they were furniture. Tonight, he looked like a man watching his world collapse. His expensive suit was wrinkled. His hair was disheveled. His eyes were red with exhaustion and fear. "What's going on out here?" he demanded. Marcus straightened. "Sir, one of the maids thinks she knows what's wrong with your mother. I was just sending her back to her quarters." Victor's gaze landed on Lila for what might have been the first time since she'd started working there. She could see him trying to place her, this small woman in a cleaning uniform who was somehow standing in his medical wing during the worst night of his life. "You're—" he started, then stopped. He didn't know her name. "Lila Ortiz, sir. I clean the main house. I've been working here for 8 months. And you think you know what's wrong with my mother? The question hung in the air between them. Behind Victor, she could see the doctors working frantically. One of them looked up and noticed the conversation in the hallway. His expression was a mixture of exhaustion and barely controlled panic. "Sir," Lila said, her voice shaking but determined. "I know I'm just a maid. I know I don't belong here. But that smell, the one from the diffuser in her room, it's wrong. My grandmother, she was a healer back home. She saved a boy who was poisoned by something just like that." One of the doctors had moved closer to the door. "Mr. Hale, we really need to focus on the patient right now. We're losing her." Victor looked back at his mother, then at Lila. "You're telling me that 20 of the best doctors in the world are wrong, and you, a maid, are right?" "I'm not saying they're wrong," Lila said quickly. "I'm saying maybe they're missing something. Something that's been in the air this whole time." From inside the room, a younger doctor called out, "Mr. Hale, when exactly did you install that aromatherapy system?" Victor frowned. "About 6 months ago. The company said it would help her sleep, reduce stress. Medical-grade oils, completely safe." "And when did her symptoms start?" The hallway went quiet except for the sound of machines and the storm outside. Victor's face went pale. "About 6 months ago." The younger doctor, whose badge read, "Dr. Patel," stepped into the hallway. "Sir, I've been reviewing her chart. Her symptoms consistently worsen when she's in her room for extended periods. They improve slightly when she's moved for procedures." Marcus was shaking his head. "This is ridiculous. We're talking about aromatherapy, not poison gas." But Dr. Patel was looking at Lila with new interest. "What exactly do you think is wrong with the diffuser?" Lila's mouth was dry, but she forced herself to speak. "Back home, people started buying cheap oils from the city. They looked real, smelled expensive, but they were mixed with chemicals to make them last longer. A little boy almost died, breathing them. My grandmother said, 'Real plant oils smell clean and sharp. These smell sweet and heavy, like plastic flowers.'" Dr. Patel nodded slowly. "Volatile organic compounds, synthetic fragrances. If she's been exposed to low levels for months." "This is insane," another doctor called from inside the room. "We're dealing with multi-system organ failure, not aromatherapy sensitivity." Victor stood in the doorway, torn between the world that had always made sense to him and a possibility that made no sense at all. His mother was dying. The best medical minds money could buy were failing. And a maid whose name he didn't even know was suggesting that the solution might be as simple as turning off a machine. "What are you asking me to do?" he said to Lila. "Turn it off," she said. "Open the windows, get fresh air in the room, and let me try something my grandmother taught me. Something that might help her body clear whatever's been building up in her lungs." The senior doctor stepped into the hallway. "Mr. Hale, I cannot recommend allowing unqualified personnel to treat your mother with folk remedies." "Then what do you recommend?" Victor snapped. "Because everything you've tried has failed." The doctor had no answer. Victor looked at Lila one more time. This woman, who'd been invisible to him for 8 months. This stranger who cleaned his floors, and somehow smelled something his experts had missed. 10 minutes, he said finally. Under Dr. Patel's supervision. If anything goes wrong, we stop immediately. And with those words, the impossible became possible. Dr. Patel moved quickly. "Turn off the diffuser. Open those windows. I want fresh air circulation immediately." A nurse unplugged the sleek white machine. Its soft blue light died, and the steady stream of mist stopped flowing. Another nurse cranked open the tall windows that faced the estate's gardens. Cold, rain-scented air rushed into the room, cutting through the heavy sweetness that had saturated every surface. "I need hot water," Lila said, her voice barely steady. "And bay leaves, ginger, salt, from the kitchen." "The kitchen is closed," Marcus said. "Then open it," Victor snapped. "Get her whatever she needs." Within minutes, a confused cook had delivered a metal bowl, steaming water, and the herbs Lila had requested. Her hands shook as she prepared them, the way her grandmother had taught her. Slice the ginger thin to release the oils. Crush the bay leaves between her palms. Add just enough salt to help the steam carry the medicine. The senior doctor watched with barely concealed disgust. "We're really going to let the maid boil leaves over a dying woman?" "We're going to let her try," Dr. Patel said firmly. "Because what we've been doing isn't working." Lila poured the hot water over the herbs, Steam rose in sharp, clean-smelling clouds that cut through the artificial floral scent like a knife. She carried the bowl to Miriam's bedside, acutely aware that every person in that room was watching her every move. Miriam lay unconscious, her breathing rapid and shallow. Her skin had a grayish tint that made Lila's stomach clench. The monitors around the bed beeped frantically, displaying numbers that meant nothing to her but everything to the doctors. "What exactly are you planning to do?" Dr. Patel asked quietly. "Steam tent," Lila said. "Like a humidifier, but stronger. The herbs help open the airways, help the body process toxins, and there are pressure points, places where you can help circulation." She took a clean towel and draped it carefully over the bowl, creating a small tent that would direct the steam toward Miriam's face without interfering with any of the medical equipment. The sharp scent of ginger and bay leaves began to fill the immediate area around the bed. "Now what?" Victor asked. "Now we wait," Lila said, "and we help her body remember how to breathe." She placed 2 fingers gently on Miriam's upper chest, just below the collarbone, where her grandmother had taught her the rivers of breath and blood came together. Light pressure, just enough to signal the body that help was coming. "Pressure points?" Dr. Patel murmured, watching closely. "You're targeting the subclavian vessels and the thoracic lymphatic drainage." Lila didn't know those words, but she knew the feeling under her fingertips. The flutter of a heart working too hard. The tension of muscles that had forgotten how to relax. 30 seconds passed. The monitors continued their frantic beeping. Miriam's breathing stayed rapid and shallow. "This is pointless," the senior doctor muttered. 60 seconds. Dr. Patel called out the numbers quietly. "Oxygen saturation, 78. Heart rate, 132. Respiratory rate, 36. Lila kept her fingers where they were, pressing gently, counting her own breaths to stay calm. In her mind, she could hear her grandmother's voice. "The body wants to heal, Anak. Sometimes it just needs to remember how." 90 seconds. And then, something shifted. It was subtle at first. Miriam's shoulders, which had been locked in a rigid shrug of effort, dropped by just a fraction. Her breathing, still fast, seemed to deepen slightly. "Oxygen saturation 80. 1. Dr. Patel said, surprise creeping into his voice. "Heart rate 128. The senior doctor stepped closer to the monitors, frowning. That could be coincidental. But it wasn't stopping. Over the next few minutes, the numbers continued to improve, slowly, incrementally, but consistently. Miriam's breathing became less frantic. The blue tint around her lips began to fade. Saturation 86. Heart rate 115. Respiratory rate 32. Lila felt tears stinging her eyes. She kept the pressure steady, kept the steam flowing, kept whispering the words her grandmother had taught her, in a language none of these doctors understood. "This is impossible," someone whispered. But the monitors didn't lie. Miriam was stabilizing for the first time in hours. At the 10-minute mark, she took one long, deep breath. The kind of breath that fills the lungs completely, the kind you only notice when you've been listening to someone fight for air. The critical alarm that had been blaring for hours finally went silent. "Oxygen saturation 92, Dr. Patel announced, his voice filled with wonder. "Heart rate 105. She's stabilizing." Victor sank into a chair beside the bed, his face in his hands. "How is this possible?" "We need to run tests," Dr. Patel said. "Full environmental analysis of this room. Toxicology panels. If she's been chronically exposed to something in that diffuser." "The oils?" Lila said quietly. "They need to test the oils. My grandmother always said, real medicine from plants smells alive. Fake medicine smells like death wearing perfume." They kept the steam treatment going for another 20 minutes, until the bowl cooled and Miriam's vital signs had stabilized in ranges that no longer made the machines scream. When they finally lifted the towel away, the artificial floral scent that had saturated the room for months was almost completely gone, replaced by the clean smell of herbs and rain-washed air. Miriam was still unconscious, still critically ill, but she was breathing, really breathing for the first time in hours. "We'll need to keep her under close observation," Dr. Patel said. "But this response, it's remarkable." The senior doctor was studying the monitors with a mixture of confusion and grudging respect. "I want that diffuser and every bottle of oil sent for immediate analysis. Full chemical breakdown." Victor stood up slowly, looking at Lila as if seeing her for the first time. "You saved her." "I helped," Lila corrected. "The doctors saved her. I just took away something that was hurting her." "How did you know?" he asked. How did you see what we missed? Lila thought of her grandmother, of the village where she'd learned that healing wasn't about degrees or machines, but about paying attention to what the body was trying to say. Because I've been cleaning this room for 8 months, she said simply. I smelled that scent every day, and tonight, when I heard her struggling to breathe, I remembered another time when the air was wrong, and someone almost died. Victor nodded slowly. What's your full name? Lila Ortiz, sir. Well, Miss Ortiz, he said, I think you and I need to have a very long conversation. But first, they had to wait. They had to make sure Miriam would survive the night. They had to get the test results that would prove what Lila had smelled and what 20 doctors had missed. And then, Victor Hale would have to decide what to do with the knowledge that a maid had just taught him more about medicine than his billions had ever bought. 3 days later, the lab results arrived, like a bomb going off in the medical wing. Dr. Patel found Victor in his study, holding a folder thick with chemical analysis reports. His face was grim. We need to talk. Victor looked up from his laptop, where he'd been trying and failing to focus on quarterly earnings reports. How bad is it? The oils in that diffuser contained 17 different synthetic compounds that weren't listed on the label. Phthalates, synthetic musks, formaldehyde releasers, all known respiratory irritants. Some of them are banned in Europe. Victor set down his coffee cup with shaking hands. You're telling me I was slowly poisoning my mother with something I paid $5,000 for? Chronic low-level exposure over 6 months. It explains everything. The progressive lung inflammation, the cardiac stress, the episodes that got worse over time. Her body was trying to process toxins faster than they were being introduced. And Lila knew this. How? Dr. Patel sat down across from him. Because she'd seen it before. Because she paid attention to something we dismissed. Because sometimes the most important medical knowledge doesn't come from a textbook. Victor stared out the window at the gardens where his mother used to walk before she got too sick to leave her room. 20 specialists, millions of dollars in equipment, and a maid with a bowl of herbs figured it out in 10 minutes. She didn't figure it out, doctor, Patel corrected. She recognized it. There's a difference. Her grandmother's knowledge passed down through generations of people who couldn't afford doctors, taught her to trust her senses in ways we've forgotten how to do. Where is she now? Back to her regular duties. Cleaning the West Wing, I think. Victor stood up. Not anymore. He found Lila in the library, carefully dusting the leather-bound books that no one in the family had opened in years. She looked up when he entered, immediately nervous. Sir, if this is about the other night, I know I overstepped. I won't. Sit down, he said gently. Please. She perched on the edge of a chair, hands folded in her lap, looking like she expected to be fired. The test results came back, Victor said. You were right. The oils were toxic. You saved my mother's life. Relief flooded her face, followed quickly by something that looked like vindication. My grandmother wasn't crazy. No, she wasn't. And neither are you. He pulled up a chair across from her. I need to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly. If money and legal status weren't obstacles, what would you do with your life? The question caught her off guard. What do you mean? I mean, if you could do anything, be anything, what would it be? She was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I'd study medicine. Real medicine. Not to replace what my grandmother taught me, but to prove it. To show that her knowledge and hospital knowledge can work together. Why? Because people like me, we die from things that could be prevented. We don't trust doctors because doctors don't trust us. We use remedies that sometimes work and sometimes don't because we can't afford the ones that always work. But what if we could have both? What if someone could speak both languages? Victor leaned forward. What if I told you that could happen? I'd say you're being kind, but it's impossible. I don't have papers. I barely finished high school. I clean toilets for a living. You also just diagnosed something that stumped 20 specialists. You have knowledge that medical schools don't teach. You see connections that trained doctors miss. He paused. I want to fund your education. All of it. GED, college, medical school, whatever it takes. Lila stared at him like he'd spoken in a foreign language. I can't accept charity. It's not charity. It's an investment. In you. In your grandmother's knowledge. In a different way of thinking about medicine. He leaned back. I built my fortune on the idea that data and algorithms could solve everything. But data didn't save my mother. You did, with knowledge that's been dismissed and ignored for generations. What would you want in return? Your best effort. And a promise that when you become a doctor, you don't forget where you came from. You don't disappear into some elite hospital and leave people like my mother, like you used to be, behind. Tears were running down her face now. Why would you do this for me? Because 3 nights ago, I watched my mother dying while the best medical minds money could buy stood around helpless. And then a maid I'd never bothered to learn the name of stepped into the room and saved her life with a bowl of herbs from my own kitchen. His voice cracked slightly. Because I realized that all my money and power meant nothing if I couldn't recognize wisdom when it was standing right in front of me. Lila wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I'm scared. What if I'm not smart enough? What if I fail and prove everyone right about people like me? You're already smarter than you know. You just need the tools to prove it to the world. He stood up. Think about it. Take your time. But Lila, don't let fear make this decision for you. That night, Lila sat in her small room, staring at her grandmother's notebook. She called her mother in the Philippines, speaking in rapid Tagalog, explaining what had happened, what was being offered. Anak, her mother said through the crackling connection, your Lola always said you had the gift. She said someday you'd build a bridge between the old ways and the new ways. Maybe this is how. But what if I fail, Mama? Then you fail trying to do something important. That's better than succeeding at staying small. The next morning, Lila knocked on Victor's study door. I'll do it, she said. But I have conditions. A smiled. I'm listening. I work for everything. You pay for school, but I earn my grades. I don't owe you anything except my best effort. And if this ever feels like ownership instead of opportunity, I walk away. Agreed. And when I'm done, when I'm a real doctor, I come back here. Not to work for you, but to work for people like me. People who clean your floors and cook your food and take care of your family. People who have knowledge but no voice. Also agreed. She took a deep breath. Then yes, I'll try. What neither of them knew was how hard the next 8 years would be. How many times Lila would want to quit. How many nights she'd fall asleep over textbooks, wondering if she was fooling herself. How many classmates would look at her accent, her background, her age, and assume she didn't belong. But they also didn't know how many lives would be changed by that decision. How many patients would be saved by a doctor who understood both the language of laboratories and the language of grandmothers. How many medical students would learn to listen to wisdom that didn't come with degrees. The first step was the hardest, believing that a maid could become a doctor. The second step was even harder, proving it to a world that had already decided what people like her were worth. But Lila had something most people didn't. She had the memory of her grandmother's hands, the knowledge that healing could come from anywhere, and the absolute certainty that if you could help, you had to try. Even if the whole world told you that you weren't qualified to help. Especially then. Dr. Patel became her first mentor, meeting with her twice a week to help her prepare for the GED exam. You already understand anatomy, he told her during their first session. You just need to learn the names we use for things your grandmother taught you to feel. It was true. When he showed her diagrams of the respiratory system, she could see exactly where her grandmother had taught her to press to help someone breathe. When he explained how the lymphatic system worked, she recognized the rivers her Lola had described flowing under the skin. The knowledge was always there, Dr. Patel said. We're just giving you the vocabulary to translate it. But vocabulary was harder than knowledge. Lila spent her days cleaning the mansion and her nights hunched over GED prep books, struggling with algebra and chemistry, fighting to understand concepts that seemed designed to exclude people like her. 3 months later, she passed the exam on her first try. Victor kept his word about everything. Legal help to fix her immigration status, enrollment at the local community college, a trust fund that would cover every expense but couldn't be touched for anything except education. You're free, he told her the day her work visa was approved. Free to succeed, free to fail, free to walk away if this isn't what you want. But walking away was the last thing on her mind. For the first time in her life, Lila had a future that stretched beyond the next paycheck, the next visa renewal, the next family that might or might not keep her employed. She had a chance to become the bridge her grandmother had always said the world needed, and she wasn't going to waste it. The first semester of community college nearly broke her. Lila sat in lecture halls surrounded by 18-year-olds who'd been preparing for college their entire lives. They spoke in casual shorthand about concepts she'd never heard of. They complained about professors she found brilliant. They treated education like a right instead of a miracle. She failed her first chemistry quiz, got a C- on her first English essay, sat in the back of every classroom, afraid to ask questions that might reveal how far behind she was. "I don't belong here," she told Dr. Patel during one of their coffee meetings. "These kids, they know things I've never even heard of. They talk about high school AP classes and SAT scores like everyone speaks that language." "You're not supposed to know what they know," he said gently. "You know things they don't. The question is whether you're going to let their head start convince you to quit your race." "What if I'm just not smart enough for this?" Dr. Patel pulled out his phone and showed her a video from the night she'd saved Miriam. Security footage from the hallway, grainy but clear enough to see her standing up to Marcus, insisting something was wrong with the air. That woman in the video diagnosed environmental poisoning by smell alone. She recognized a pattern 20 specialists missed. She trusted her knowledge even when everyone told her she was wrong. He put the phone away. That woman is smart enough for anything. Slowly, things began to click. Biology made sense because she already understood how bodies worked. Chemistry became easier when she realized it was just the science behind her grandmother's remedies. Anatomy was like learning the formal names for old friends. By her second semester, she was getting A's. By her third, other students were asking her to study with them. By the time she transferred to the state university, she had a 3.8 gigapascals and a growing reputation as the student who could explain complex concepts in simple terms. "You have a gift for teaching," her organic chemistry professor told her. "You make the complicated feel accessible." "I learned from someone who had to make medicine accessible," Lila replied. "My grandmother never had the luxury of making things complicated." Medical school was a different kind of challenge. The workload was crushing. The competition was fierce. The pressure was constant. But Lila had something her classmates didn't. She'd already proven to herself that she belonged there. During her first year anatomy lab, while other students struggled to memorize the names of muscles and bones, Lila could feel the connections her grandmother had taught her. When they studied the cardiovascular system, she understood circulation not just as a concept, but as something she'd felt under her fingertips. "How do you make this look so easy?" her lab partner asked during a particularly difficult dissection. "It's not easy," Lila said. "I just learned it differently first." She started a study group that met in the evenings, teaching other students to think about the body as a living system instead of a collection of parts to memorize. Word spread. Soon she was tutoring students who were struggling, helping them see patterns instead of just facts. "You should consider academic medicine," one of her professors suggested. "Research, teaching. You have a unique perspective." But Lila knew where she was headed. Every summer break, she returned to work at community health clinics, treating patients who reminded her of her family, her neighbors, herself before Victor's offer changed everything. She saw how the medical system failed people who couldn't navigate its complexity, who couldn't afford its costs, who didn't speak its language. "I'm going into family medicine," she told Dr. Patel during her third year. "Community health. I want to work with people who fall through the cracks." "The academic world will try to talk you out of that," he warned. "They'll say you're wasting your potential." "My potential was always to be a bridge," she said. "Bridges don't belong in ivory towers." During her residency, Lila began documenting her grandmother's remedies, cross-referencing them with medical literature, building a database of traditional knowledge that had never been formally studied. She published her first paper during her second year, Integrative Approaches to Respiratory Health, Bridging Traditional and Evidence-Based Medicine. The response was mixed. Some colleagues dismissed it as soft science. Others were intrigued by the connections she'd drawn between folk remedies and established pharmacology. "You're walking a tightrope," her residency director warned. "The medical establishment doesn't always welcome challenges to conventional thinking." "Then maybe it's time for the establishment to listen," Lila replied. She finished her residency with honors and multiple job offers from prestigious hospitals. She turned them all down. "I'm going home," she told Victor when she called to update him on her plans. "Home to the Philippines?" "Home to where this started. I want to open a clinic. Not just any clinic. One that serves people like I used to be. People like your mother was, before you had money. People who need both kinds of medicine." Victor was quiet for a moment. "What do you need?" "A building. Equipment. Funding for the first few years until we can prove the model works." "Done. Where do you want to build it?" Lila smiled. "I was thinking about converting part of your estate. The old carriage house. It's big enough, and it would be symbolic. The place where a maid became a doctor, now helping other people who've been overlooked. I love it. When do we start? We already have, she said. The night you let me into that room with a bowl of herbs. Everything since then has just been building toward this moment. 6 months later, Dr. Lila Ortiz stood in front of a renovated carriage house, reading the sign that had been installed that morning. The Moritz Ortiz Community Health Center. Healing with science, story, and dignity. Named after a village healer who had never left her island, but whose knowledge had traveled the world through her granddaughter's hands. The clinic was unlike anything in the area. Exam rooms, equipped with state-of-the-art diagnostic equipment, sat next to consultation rooms where traditional healers met with patients. A teaching kitchen offered nutrition classes alongside a garden where medicinal herbs grew in raised beds. No one gets turned away for inability to pay. Lila had insisted when they were writing the clinic's policies. No one gets dismissed because their English isn't perfect or their insurance isn't accepted. And no one gets told that their grandmother's remedies are worthless. The model was simple but revolutionary. Listen first, then treat. Ask patients what they believed about their bodies, what their families had taught them about healing, what mattered most to them beyond just getting rid of symptoms. You're not here to save anyone, Lila told the young doctors who came to train at the clinic. You're here to partner with them, to combine what you learned in medical school with what they learned at their grandmother's kitchen table. The results spoke for themselves. Patient satisfaction scores were off the charts. Health outcomes improved dramatically. Emergency room visits from the surrounding community dropped by 40%. But the real measure of success wasn't in the statistics, it was in the stories. Like Maria Santos, the housekeeper who'd been managing diabetes with a combination of metformin and bitter melon tea her mother had taught her to brew. Instead of dismissing the tea, Lila had researched its active compounds and helped Maria optimize both treatments. Like James Wright, the groundskeeper who'd been treating his arthritis with willow bark extract his grandfather had shown him how to make. Lila had explained how it worked similarly to aspirin and helped him adjust the dosage for maximum benefit. Like Mrs. Chen, the cook who'd been afraid to tell her previous doctor about the ginseng and ginkgo supplements she took for memory, worried he'd call them Chinese nonsense. Lila had reviewed the research, adjusted her other medications to avoid interactions, and validated decades of traditional knowledge. This is what medicine should be, Dr. Patel said during a visit to the clinic. Respectful, collaborative, human. This is what medicine was before we forgot how to listen, Lila replied. Word spread quickly. Medical students requested rotations at the clinic. Researchers came to study the integrative model. Other communities asked for help setting up similar programs. But the moment that meant the most to Lila came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, almost exactly 5 years after the night she'd climbed those stairs to Miriam's room. She was reviewing charts when her assistant knocked on the door. Dr. Ortiz, there's someone here to see you. Says it's personal. Marcus Webb stood in the waiting room, looking uncomfortable and older than she remembered. The man who'd once tried to throw her out of the medical wing now held his cap in his hands like a supplicant. Dr. Ortiz, he said formally. I was wondering if I could make an appointment. Of course, Marcus. What's going on? High blood pressure, chest pains. The doctor at the hospital, he wants to put me on 4 different medications. Says I need to change my whole diet, exercise more. He paused. I was wondering if maybe you could take a look, see if there's another way. Lila smiled. Let's start at the beginning. Tell me about your days, your stress, your family history, what your grandmother used to do when someone in your family had heart trouble. And, for the next hour, she listened to Marcus talk about his life, his fears, his family's remedies for high blood pressure. She explained how stress affected the cardiovascular system, how certain herbs could support heart health, how small changes in diet and routine could make big differences. You're not talking down to me, he said at the end of the appointment. You're not making me feel stupid for not knowing medical words. You're not stupid, Lila said. You're human, and humans deserve medicine that treats them like humans. As he left with a treatment plan that combined medication, lifestyle changes, and a tea recipe his grandmother would have recognized, Marcus paused at the door. Dr. Ortiz, I owe you an apology. That night, when you were trying to help Mrs. Hale, I should have listened. You were doing your job, she said gently. No, I was protecting a system that didn't want to be challenged. You were trying to save a life. He put his cap back on. I'm glad you didn't listen to me. So am I, Lila said. That evening, she sat in her office, looking out at the herb garden where bay leaves and ginger grew alongside roses and lavender. In a few hours, she'd drive home to her small house, call her mother in the Philippines, and read a few pages from her grandmother's notebook before bed. Tomorrow, she'd see patients who trusted her with their stories, their fears, their bodies. She'd teach medical students that healing was about more than diagnosis and treatment. She'd continue building the bridge her grandmother had always said the world needed. But tonight, she just sat quietly, thinking about the journey from that cramped staff room to this office, from a maid with a secret notebook to a doctor with a mission. The girl who'd been afraid to speak in that marble hallway had found her voice, and she was just getting started. 2 years later, Dr. Lila Ortiz stood at the podium of the National Conference on Integrative Medicine, looking out at an audience of 3,000 healthcare professionals. The convention center in Chicago was packed with doctors, nurses, researchers, and medical students from around the world. She was 35 now, with silver threading through her black hair and laugh lines around her eyes. Her badge read, Dr. Lila Ortiz, MD, Director, Maid Ortiz, Community Health Network. What had started as one clinic had grown into 12 centers across 3 states. 7 years ago, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the auditorium. 20 of the world's best doctors crowded into a billionaire's bedroom, watching his mother die. They had every tool modern medicine could provide. They had decades of training, millions of dollars in equipment, and access to any specialist in the world. The audience was silent, leaning forward. They failed. And then a maid, a woman whose name they didn't even know, stepped into that room with a bowl of herbs from their own kitchen and saved a life that all their expertise couldn't save. She clicked to her first slide, a photo of her grandmother's notebook, open to a page covered in careful handwriting. That maid was me. And I'm here today not to tell you about the miracle of folk medicine, but to tell you about the tragedy of medical arrogance, about what we lose when we stop listening to wisdom that doesn't come with degrees. A murmur went through the crowd, some nodding, others shifting uncomfortably. The woman I saved that night was dying from chronic exposure to synthetic compounds in an aromatherapy diffuser. 20 specialists missed it because they were looking for complex diseases, not simple poisoning. I caught it because my grandmother had taught me to trust my nose, to pay attention to what the air was telling me. She clicked to the next slide, before and after photos of the Maid Ortiz Clinic. Today, our network serves over 50,000 patients annually. We've reduced emergency room visits in our communities by 38%. We've improved medication compliance by 60%. We've cut healthcare costs while improving outcomes. The numbers were impressive, but Lila knew they weren't the real story. But those statistics don't tell you about Maria, the housekeeper who'd been managing her diabetes in secret because she was afraid her doctor would mock her grandmother's remedies. Or James, the janitor who'd been treating his depression with street. John's worked because he couldn't afford therapy and was too proud to ask for help. She paused, looking out at the sea of white coats. They don't tell you about the thousands of patients who've been dismissed, ignored, or condescended to because they brought knowledge that didn't fit into our narrow definition of medicine. A hand went up in the audience. Dr. Ortiz, are you suggesting we should abandon evidence-based medicine for folk remedies? I'm suggesting we expand our definition of evidence, she replied. When a remedy has been used successfully for generations, that's evidence. When a patient tells you something works for them, that's evidence. When you see patterns that don't fit your textbook, that's evidence too. Another hand. But how do we separate effective traditional practices from dangerous superstition? The same way we separate effective modern practices from dangerous medical errors. We study them. We test them. We listen to the people who've been using them. She clicked to a slide showing research data. 60% of our current pharmaceuticals are derived from natural compounds. Aspirin from willow bark, digitalis from foxglove, morphine from poppies. Traditional knowledge led us to all of these. She told them about the research her clinic was conducting, how they'd validated the anti-inflammatory properties of turmeric preparations used by their Indian patients, how they documented the cardiovascular benefits of hawthornberry teas used by their Eastern European patients, how they'd confirmed the antimicrobial effects of honey and garlic combinations used by patients from a dozen different cultures. We're not replacing modern medicine, she emphasized. We're completing it. After her presentation, she was surrounded by attendees, medical students asking about residency opportunities, researchers interested in collaboration, administrators wanting to know how to implement similar programs. But the conversation that mattered most came from an older doctor who waited until the crowd had dispersed. Dr. Ortiz, I'm Dr. Elizabeth Morrison from Johns Hopkins. I've been practicing for 30 years, and I have to admit, your presentation challenged some assumptions I've held for a long time. What kind of assumptions? That patients who use home remedies are non-compliant. That traditional practices are inherently unscientific. That my job is to educate patients out of their backward beliefs. She paused. I'm realizing I may have dismissed valuable knowledge because of my own biases. We all have, Lila said gently. The question is what we do with that realization. I'd like to visit your clinic. Learn how you integrate traditional and modern approaches. Maybe bring some of my residents. You're welcome anytime. But Dr. Morrison, can I ask you something? Of course. When you visit, don't come as the expert teaching the natives. Come as a student learning from teachers you've never met. Some of our most valuable knowledge comes from patients who've never set foot in a medical school. Dr. Morrison nodded slowly. I think I'm beginning to understand. That evening, Lila called Victor from her hotel room. Miriam had passed away peacefully the year before, at 87, surrounded by family and breathing easily until the end. How did it go? He asked. Good, challenging. I think I made some people uncomfortable. Good. Comfortable people don't change. Victor, I've been thinking about expanding again. There are communities in rural areas, urban food deserts, immigrant neighborhoods that need what we're doing. But it's going to require significant funding. How significant? $50 million over 5 years. Enough to establish 20 new clinics and train 100 new practitioners in integrative approaches. Victor was quiet for a moment. Done. But I have one condition. What's that? Name the program after your grandmother. The Moritz-Ortiz Fellowship for Integrative Medicine. Let her name be associated with training the next generation of doctors who know how to listen. Lila felt tears sting her eyes. She would have loved that. She would have been proud of you, just like I am. 3 months later, the first class of Moritz-Ortiz Fellows began their training. 24 young doctors from diverse backgrounds, all committed to learning how to bridge traditional and modern medicine. Among them was Dr. Sarah Kim, whose Korean grandmother had treated her childhood asthma with ginger and honey. Dr. Datkor. Miguel Rodriguez, whose Mexican grandmother had used noble cactus to manage his father's diabetes. Dr. Aisha Okafor, whose Nigerian grandmother had treated infections with neem and bitter leaf. You're here because you understand something many doctors don't. Lila told them during orientation, that healing wisdom exists in every culture, every community, every family. Your job is to learn how to honor that wisdom while applying the best of modern medicine. She taught them to take detailed cultural histories, to ask patients about their family's healing traditions, to research the scientific basis for traditional remedies instead of dismissing them, to see themselves as partners in healing rather than authorities dispensing treatment. Remember, she told them, the goal isn't to prove that traditional medicine is better than modern medicine, or vice versa. The goal is to give patients the best of both worlds. The program grew rapidly. Medical schools began requesting curriculum consultations. Hospitals started implementing cultural competency training based on the Moritz-Ortiz model. International health organizations invited Lila to speak about integrative approaches to global health challenges. But the moment that brought everything full circle came on a quiet Tuesday morning at the original clinic. Lila was reviewing patient charts when her assistant knocked. Dr. Ortiz, there's a young woman here. She doesn't have an appointment, but she says it's important. She's asking specifically for you. The woman in the waiting room was about 25, wearing a hospital housekeeping uniform. She was nervous, twisting her hands, clearly uncomfortable being there. Dr. Ortiz? My name is Carmen Vasquez. I work at City General Hospital. I clean the ICU. Lila gestured to a chair. What can I do for you, Carmen? There's a patient there, an old man. He's been sick for weeks, and the doctors can't figure out what's wrong. But I think I know what it is. Tell me. He's in room 314. I clean that room every day. And there's a smell. Sweet, but wrong. Like fake flowers. It reminds me of something my abuela told me about, back in Guatemala. A man who got sick from breathing bad air in a factory. Lila leaned forward. What do you think is causing the smell? There's this machine. For aromatherapy. The family brought it in to help him relax. But I think it's making him worse. Every time I clean that room, I get a headache. And he's been getting sicker since they started using it. Have you told anyone? Carmen laughed bitterly. I'm just a cleaner. Who's going to listen to me? Lila stood up. I am. And so are the doctors, if we approach this right. Would you be willing to come with me to the hospital? To show me what you're seeing? You'd do that? Carmen, 7 years ago, I was exactly where you are. A cleaner who smelled something wrong and was afraid to speak up. Someone listened to me, and it saved a life. Now, it's my turn to listen to you." 2 hours later, they stood outside room 314 at City General. The patient was an elderly man with respiratory distress that had been worsening for 3 weeks. His family had indeed brought in an expensive aromatherapy diffuser, hoping to help him sleep better. Lila could smell it the moment she walked into the room, the same sickly sweet scent that had filled Miriam's bedroom years ago. "Dr. Martinez," she said to the attending physician. "I'm Dr. Ortiz from the Moritz-Ortiz Clinic. Carmen here has an observation about this patient that I think you should hear." Dr. Martinez looked skeptical. "Carmen is housekeeping staff. Carmen is a trained observer who spends more time in this room than anyone else," Lila corrected. "And she's noticed something that might be relevant to your patient's condition." It took some convincing, but eventually Dr. Martinez agreed to turn off the diffuser and send the oils for testing. 3 days later, the results came back positive for the same types of synthetic compounds that had nearly killed Miriam. The patient's condition began improving within hours of removing the diffuser. "How did you know?" Dr. Martinez asked Lila later. "I didn't. Carmen did. I just knew enough to listen to her." "But she's not medically trained." "Neither was my grandmother. Neither was I when I first recognized this pattern. Medical training teaches us a lot, but it doesn't teach us everything. Sometimes the most important knowledge comes from people who've been overlooked." Carmen was offered a position as a patient advocate at the hospital, helping to bridge communication between medical staff and support personnel. She was also accepted into the pre-med program at the local community college with a scholarship from the Moritz-Ortiz Foundation. "I want to be like you," she told Lila. "Someone who listens to people like me." "Then remember this feeling," Lila said. "Remember what it's like to have knowledge that no one wants to hear. And when you're the one with the white coat, make sure you're listening to the people who clean the floors and change the sheets and notice things that everyone else misses." That evening, Lila sat in her office, looking at the photo on her desk. It showed her grandmother, in her village kitchen, grinding herbs with a mortar and pestle, surrounded by neighbors who'd come for healing. Next to it was a newer photo, the graduating class of the second cohort of Moritz-Ortiz Fellows, 24 young doctors ready to carry forward the mission of integrative, respectful medicine. Her phone buzzed with a text from Victor. "Saw the news story about Carmen and the hospital case. Proud of you for paying it forward." She texted back, "Just doing what Lola taught me. If you can help, you help. Even when they don't want to listen? Especially then." Lila turned off her office lights and walked out to her car, past the herb garden where bay leaves and ginger grew under the stars. Tomorrow she'd see patients who trusted her with their stories. She'd teach young doctors to listen with their hearts as well as their stethoscopes. She'd continue building bridges between worlds that had been kept apart for too long. But tonight, she drove home thinking about the journey from that cramped staff room to this moment, about all the Carmens and Lilas and Maritz who had knowledge the world needed, but voices the world ignored. The maid who'd been afraid to speak had become the doctor who taught others to listen. And in exam rooms and hospital corridors across the country, a new generation of healers was learning that the most powerful medicine often came from the most unexpected places. If you knew how to pay attention, if you had the courage to listen, if you remembered that wisdom could come from anyone, anywhere, at any time, even from a woman with a mop and a memory of her grandmother's hands. If this story moved you, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more incredible stories like this one.